on BRICS. How has it backfired? Because the U.S. dollar started off the year in free fall. The first 6 months, it's in the worst shape in terms of its value to a basket of currencies since 1973. And I think you're a student of economics, Ben. You know what happened in 1973. There was a major economic crisis. So talk about overall how all of this is backfiring right now in such a major way.
Yeah, you raised so many interesting points, and there are so many ways we could go at this discussion. I'll mention a few of the effects in brief summary, and then I'll go into more detail. So in short, what Donald Trump is doing is he's accelerating the decline of U.S. hegemony, which is something that we've seen declining over decades with the rise of China in particular, but also Russia and Iran and India. But Trump is just putting the pedal to the metal, accelerating this. He's also accelerating de-dollarization, which is ironic because Trump has constantly threatened countries that try to de-dollarize, that try to seek alternatives to the US dollar. But the more that he imposes sanctions and tariffs on countries around the world, the more he encourages them to seek alternatives to the US dollar. And this is why BRICS is trying to create new mechanisms for trade in their local currencies. They're investing in gold and other assets. And central banks around the world are dumping US treasuries and buying gold. So that's also what Trump is doing. And he, ironically, the more he attacks BRICS, he's actually strengthening BRICS and making it clear why BRICS is so important, including among the weakest links within BRICS, like India. Now, India's current leader, Narendra Modi, the prime minister from the right-wing Hindu nationalist party, BJP, he was not one of the co-founders of BRICS. It was his predecessor from the center-left, kind of centrist Indian National Congress party that has its roots in the anti-colonial struggle going back to Nehru. So, they still had this kind of, even though the Congress party in India has moved away from those anti-colonial roots in a big way and took a neoliberal turn, they have their roots in that kind of anti-colonial third world nationalist tradition. They were the ones who joined BRICS. And then when Modi came in, Modi was the most pro-US leader in India's history. But now even Modi, because of Trump's aggressive policies against India, even Modi is being forced to move closer to China. And, India and Russia have always had very good relations. So Trump is doing everything he can, ironically, to accelerate de-dollarization, to improve relations between India and China, after for years, US presidents have tried to make a schism, a split in between India and China and exacerbate those relations. And then now, of course, we have this Alaska meeting between Trump and Putin. Trump has been saying for months that he's going to try to divide China and Russia. He said in October in an interview with Tucker Carlson that he was convinced that he could divide China and Russia. Well, actually, all of these policies have only further encouraged China and Russia to get closer together, while China and India are moving closer together. China and Russia now have completely de-dollarized their trade. Over 95% of bilateral trade between China and Russia is in their national currencies, the renminbi or yuan and the Russian ruble. So we also see that China's President Xi Jinping took a trip to Moscow to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the defeat of fascism in World War II. And China and Russia released an extremely long joint statement, over 8,000 words when translated into English. And in that joint statement, they made it clear. They said, third parties will not influence our relations. They emphasized that Beijing and Moscow today have the closest relations they've ever had in history. And they said the U.S. by name. The U.S. cannot divide them. So everything that Trump says he wants to do is failing. It's actually backfiring. And what this shows, I always emphasize that Trump is accelerating a trend that did not start with Trump. Now, of course, there are some liberals and Democrats in the U.S. who love to blame everything on Trump. And everything is bad because of Trump. But there are a series of trends we've seen over decades, including de-dollarization, the decline of U.S. hegemony, the multipolarization of the world, the global South seeking to create alternative institutions that give the global South, which is the global majority, more influence in international affairs. and the US dominates so many international organizations. So these are trends that did not start with Trump, but I need to emphasize that again. Everything that he's doing with these extremely aggressive attacks on so many countries, including historic US allies, it's only accelerating this trend that, it's something that you and I, Danny, talk about all the time, the increasingly multipolar world.
Yeah, and react to what Lula said in particular, because he has been leading a huge charge, and he said straight up that Russia and China were the first that he spoke to about his concerns, and both of them were very eager to pick up his call. And he said that BRICS needs to start experimenting with another currency, but we've talked about how difficult that is. But at the same time, I think even just moving and taking that leap forward is, in effect, a huge challenge and a big pressure point for all of BRICS to and the rest of the multipolar world to take de-dollarization even more seriously. How do you react to his comments?
Yeah, two main points here. One about de-dollarization, one about Brazilian politics. I'll start with de-dollarization. Now, Lula has been calling for an alternative to the US dollar for many years. This is not new, although he's become especially vocal in the past few years because of the US abuse of sanctions and tariffs. So even when Biden was president, Lula went to China and gave a historic speech at the BRICS Bank, the New Development Bank, which is based in Shanghai. And he said, we need an alternative to the US dollar. Lula said that every night I stay up, I can't sleep because I think about how we can create an alternative to the dollar. So this is not new, but again, Trump is now threatening Brazil blatantly. The US government is so flagrantly violating Brazil's sovereignty, meddling in Brazil's internal affairs. I'll get to that in a moment because Trump is allied with the far right in Brazil and Bolsonaro, one of the most pro-US anti-nationalist leaders in the world. I mean, the idea that Bolsonaro is a nationalist is crazy. I mean, he just completely sold his country to the US on a silver platter. So that's one of the main reasons why Trump is trying to meddle against Lula, because Lula is one of the co-founders of BRICS. This is something that is not understood often, and especially there's been a lot of disinformation by Trump supporters because, they claim Trump is fighting the deep state, and they supported Bolsonaro, the far-right leader in Brazil, who, again, was one of the most pro-US leaders in the world. Bolsonaro would give rallies in Brazil waving the US flag. I mean, it's so crazy. He was president. He would hold events, not with US diplomats. I mean, when you have an event with another diplomat, it's customary to have the two flags of the two countries. No, Bolsonaro would have events in Brazil as president with the US flag. I mean, he is a US puppet. And his son, Eduardo Bolsonaro, is now living in the US. And Jair Bolsonaro, his father, said in an interview that his son wants to be a US citizen. He's seeking US citizenship because he wants to be a politician in Washington to impose sanctions on Brazil. These people are complete traitors to their countries. Lula, on the other hand, there was this disinformation claiming, these Trump supporters claiming that like Lula supposedly is like a globalist George Soros puppet. That's absurd. Lula has always been, going back to when he first became president nearly 20 years ago, he was always a left-wing nationalist leader who understands that Latin America must play an important role in a multipolar world. So back when Hugo Chavez was president of Venezuela, Lula was working with Venezuela and other countries to create alternatives like the CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, which was founded as an alternative to the Organization of American States, the OAS, which is based in Washington and controlled by Washington. I mean, so Lula has always played a role in Latin American integration. Now, I have criticisms of Lula, certainly. For instance, he's been very unfriendly to Venezuela in the past few years under President Maduro, and he's taken some actions, I think, that actually discourage Latin American regional integration, attacking Nicaragua as well. So I'm not one of these people who says that Lula is without flaws. He has some flaws. I think he's so obsessed with this idea of liberal democracy and so-called authoritarianism. It's like this infection of this US version of liberalism, which I think is very dangerous in the global South. So I'm not saying Lula is without faults. But when it comes to foreign policy, he has always recognized that Brazil is a massive country with over 200 million people. It's fallen a little bit in recent years because of so much US meddling and the coup against Dilma Rousseff and the coup against Lula, the imprisonment of Lula on fake charges in 2018 in a US-backed operation, which is what led Bolsonaro to come to power in the first place. So the Brazilian economy has been in crisis in the past several years, but Brazil, just a few years ago, was the 6th largest economy in the world. It's now maybe the 7th or 8th, depending on how you measure it. So it's a major economy in the world. And Lula has always said that we want Brazil and Latin America to play a key role in the multipolar world. And that's why he co-founded BRICS. Even before Putin came back as president, Lula was there as the co-founder of BRICS. So again, what I'm saying here, it's getting back to the point I was talking about earlier, Danny, which is about how what Trump is doing is accelerating trends that already happened. So all this stuff was already happening, even when Obama was president and when Biden was president. But now Trump is being so aggressive. He imposed 50% tariffs on Brazil. He imposed sanctions on Brazilian officials. He imposed sanctions on a Brazilian Supreme Court justice because Bolsonaro attempted a coup to try to use the military to violently overthrow the government after he lost the election to Lula in 2022. So he tried a coup attempt, it failed. Now he's facing legal consequences, as any leader who attempts a coup would face in any country in the world. So now the US government is sanctioning Brazil on behalf of a Brazilian political leader against the democratically elected government of Brazil. It's crazy. It's just complete, blatant, naked imperialism. So now Lula is even more outspoken, saying, we cannot tolerate this US-dominated order. He gave a speech where he said, the US thinks it's the sheriff of the world, the policeman of the world. We cannot tolerate that. He says the US thinks it's the emperor of the world. We do not want an emperor. So this is encouraging so many other countries to come together and create these alternatives. And of course, BRICS has always been at the heart of this attempt to create alternatives. But I think BRICS is actually, I think it's certainly not the end of, you could say it's the end of the beginning. We're entering a new phase, but it's certainly not the beginning of the end.